Everybody. Welcome to the Homeschool Hangout. My name is Jacqueline, and I'm here with Sugar, who's putting
Hello.
up her lower third right now. And we are here to talk about spelling today. I don't know if you realize today is the televised Scripps National Spelling Bee. I didn't know if Sugar knew about this.
No, yeah, I'm sorry, I thought you were talking to the audience. No, of course I know that. I mean, first of all, Scripps is a big name here in San Diego, so we know that name quite well, even though that's a Midwestern side of the family of Scripps. But yeah, the spelling bee has kind of always been my little fun thing that I used to do. I used to love being in the spelling bee when I was a kid, so that was always something to look forward to.
See, I'm bummed out because all the televising is on ESPN and we don't have cable. So I didn't go through and dig to see if I could watch it live online. But that makes me sad. It's on cable. One of the things about the ABC, Disney, ESPN merger. So, and also, though, talking about spelling this week, there was a really interesting discussion in one of my homeschool Facebook groups. And it was somebody was saying, you know, do you teach your kids spelling? I don't want to kill the love of writing in my children. How do you balance it? And I thought that's a really interesting point. Of course, we all agreed spelling's important. But I know for us, one of the things we do is we have the kids write a first draft for just about everything. How about you, Sugar?
Yeah, we write first and second drafts, but what's funny is that, you know, the kids, they still, even though, like, you have to do it so many times to explain the first draft, and I show them my first drafts of anything that I write as well. And so, you know, they're starting to understand the importance of the first draft, but still, you know, when my teachers used to call it, when you would mark up a paper with red pen, she would call it bloody papers. So I always kind of like circle and pencil. So I try not to use really offensive colors when I'm doing the editing or the, you know, going back through and spell checking and kind of, you know, checking for grammar, checking for commas and all that good stuff, and try and go over it well together. Oops, sorry, that would be Skype.
That's okay. I know I was talking to my 10-year-old last night about it, and she is the one who is not the natural speller in the family. They always say good readers make good spellers. They're liars. That's not always the case. And she was making the comment, I was asking her what she thought about this, and she loves the fact that we tell them to just write. Just write it all down, not to worry about what the spelling looks like or what the handwriting looks like or what the grammar looks like. Because she was saying that before we started really instituting it, it would be horrible to have, like, great handwriting and then misspell, like, 3 words and have to rewrite stuff. So for her, the spelling and the semantics of writing was so, how do I say this, creativity inhibiting, that to tell her just write everything you want down and we'll take care of it later really freed her up a lot.
You know, that was one of the things that I kind of take some of the writing lessons that we have as writers, and I said, you know, just freeform, just write whatever you want, whatever you're thinking right now, whatever's on your mind. And it took them a little while to, you know, start doing that, because they were like, well, what if I get something wrong? What if I spell something? I'm like, just write it. We'll go over the spelling later. So,
yeah, that kind of stuff's really nice. I had a history teacher that used to turn on classical music, and we had to sit down and write about anything. He didn't care what we wrote about. I don't even think he ever read them. You just had to write for like 15, 20 minutes. And that was a really freeing thing for me, because I think I felt held hostage to all the spelling. But I think we all agree, as people who, especially for us, we write and we read what others have written, spelling is a very important subject.
you know, there are some writers that I read that have atrocious spelling, and I sit there and I just can't read any further. It just drives me insane. And, you know, I don't want my kids to go out in the world and have anybody judge them for their spelling, because people do judge them for their spelling. Like, there are people that can't get the difference between two and two, and, you know, that's not necessarily spelling so much as just understanding of which word goes where. But, you know, just phonetic spelling. Like, remember in the 70s and early 80s, everybody's like, oh, just spell how it sounds. And a lot of people stuck to that. You know, they didn't actually try and test anymore.
Yeah, it is kind of a weird thing. I know my daughter was saying English is a weird language.
Yeah,
you know?
So we were actually talking about this. So here's when I actually had to learn English when I was 5. So spelling was easy for me because I had Spanish, so I had a lot of the root words, so it was really easy for me to be able to spell a lot of the words. So that's why I always killed it in the spelling bee when I was a kid, because I knew the root words because I spoke Spanish. But uh, English, in Spanish, all the vowels are pronounced a certain way. So you don't have to worry about the E's at the end or the INGs or things like that. Like when you're conjugating, it's easy. The vowels are still pronounced the same way. So we were talking about, we went to see Divergent last week, and Candor, the group, my daughter, she says, but they pronounce it like ER, candor, and I said, that's the thing. It's like, in other languages, the vowels are always pronounced a certain way. And so English is really hard because of that. It can be pronounced 4 different ways, an A can be pronounced in so many different ways, it's not even funny. And then O-U-G-H, it can be silent, it can have an F sound, it's crazy.
Yeah, it's so weird. I don't even know what to think. Which, that in spelling rules, what is it, the I before E except after C, or when it sounds like neighbor.
Or sounded at A as in neighbor and way. I know my little spelling songs.
Yeah, except the fact is the I before E except after C is the rarity. It is not the rule. And we've had that conversation at our house. So one of the big things that everyone likes to do is workbooks, especially for the younger elementary school age, 4th, 5th grade and down. I really liked those. We did them with a few of my kids, but the big reason we did them wasn't so much the spelling words, but the handwriting. Not that the handwriting ever got good, but it got them used to writing words without having them write like paragraphs.
Right.
Our favorite starter book was Spelling Workout. That's what we started with. And it's like one of those super easy, I think it's like $8 a book, and you get a bunch of little lessons. As far as the language for me, spelling lists are very hit and miss. So, I don't know. Do your kids like doing spelling workbooks, and do they do them for your curriculum?
So in spelling, yes, we have 2 different kinds of spelling. So I have a 4th grader, and I have a junior high student. And until this year, my junior high student, or until last year actually, she was doing the same workbooks as her brother. And so this basically goes over, not necessarily the spelling words come in lists that go over rules. So like the ING rule or the ED rule or conjugating. So it goes into different rules but uses those words. And at the end they have heart words, which heart means you love them, but it's a different way of saying hard. So they're the hard words like through, and tough will be in the heart words list. So those are kind of random thrown in words that they throw in all the time that you kind of keep revisiting to make sure that it sinks in. But they've also, they'll add in things like that are fun, like the, crossword puzzles, or, taking the words and categorizing them by the different suffixes or prefixes. And so you see the same words over and over again, but for different reasons. And so the words in the lessons all week long, they keep just coming back for, like it's either used in a sentence, or it's used in the crossword, or it's, something that you have to find in a word search or something like that. But they see the words over and over and over again and write them down enough times, and then, we have our test. But you and I were kind of talking about pre-testing, and that's, at this point, that's not what I've done, because my kids' vocabulary has grown so rapidly that I've just started to say, well, they'll say, my son will say, how do you spell blah, blah, blah? He's never had a spelling test. I'm like, well, how do you think it's spelled? And he'll spell it for me, and he'll be right. So now I'm just like, okay, well, let's look at the list. And, if I want him to do the crossword or something like that, then we will. But now we just breeze through the workbooks by just making sure that he knows how to spell the words.
I think that's key, too. I think it's easy to annoy children by making them do a bunch of work for things they already know. And so I'm very pro pretest. Now, I did add a level to that at one point, because we started skipping huge swaths of a workbook of they had to be able to define it too. So if they couldn't define it, I made them do some of the definition work. But yeah, and the other side is, to test or not to test. And at what age do you start testing them? And I know for me, we did like the sight words in the workbooks when they were little, and when writing was hard, I had them spell them orally to me. Because I found with my first child, when he was in 1st grade, he'd know how to spell it, but he was having a hard time forming the letters. And so it's kind of like, what are you testing there? Are you testing his writing ability, or are you testing his knowing how to spell it ability?
Yeah, I'm not very nice when it comes to this part. I'm just like, how is that an R? That looks like an N or an H. I don't even know what that is, and I get really frustrated. And I think that's where you do need to step back as the teaching parent and just kind of go, okay, this isn't a handwriting lesson. This is a spelling lesson. And if he can read it and if he understands a word, we're okay. But at a certain point, though, you do have to say, okay, you're 8 years old. I can't read your writing. That's a bad thing, especially when you're having to do compositions.
I think sometimes it's judging where your kid's at, too. For me, that was just something I did for the first few years. Kindergarten, first grade, when we were really working on, seriously on hand-eye coordination and writing, especially with my boys. Versus now, my rule is if I can't read it, I'm not asking you, it's wrong. I think it's okay to have the freedom to say, for this kid at this time, this is what I'm going to do, or for that kid at that time, that's what I'm going to do. Because that's the joy of homeschooling, isn't it? That you can make those adaptions.
Yeah, and then I think the other thing that's kind of neat, too, is that, we can watch and see before they even start the class, right? Before they even get into kindergarten or first grade when they're picking up a pencil to do anything, we can watch and see what their stronger hand is, which one they favor, which one they use to manipulate any objects with first. So we don't push them into being a right-handed writer when they're a left-handed writer, or we don't do the opposite, oh, I'm a left-handed writer, so my son for sure is going to be. It's so weird how people get really weird about the left or the right hand for writing, but it's just, I don't know. I'm fascinated every time I see things like that. Like, you're like, oh, you're a left-handed writer? I don't write with a left hand, but my husband does, and I always think it's interesting the way people respond to that. So I would just watch them and observe first to make sure that they were holding right, and then we had to practice holding the pencil correctly, because that's going to help with because it's going to frustrate them. They're not going to want to write anything, and they're certainly not going to want to spell anything. So yeah, just the little tools, those kind of things were the other things that you get to do. You get to spend a little more time watching and putting into practice before the actual lessons start when you're doing homeschool. It's just you don't realize that it takes a couple of years to lead up to that, to the actual first spelling test. So it's kind of, I feel like we have a lot of room to really observe and place our kids properly and teach them properly that way.
Oh, definitely. I think so. I mean, I understand why parents want to push their kids into being righties, because the world is made for a right-handed person, as far as notebooks and all that. My kids were all right-handed, but different aspects of their intellect and their hand-eye coordination developed at different times, so I handled it differently. One of the other things you and I talked about a little bit is the fact that there are other spelling curriculums other than the workbook method. The one we've been using, because I kind of abandoned spelling after we went through our first few spelling workouts, because my kids were doing fine, my kids were doing well. Everyone said, if you create readers, they will become spellers. They lied. Not all the time does that happen. My voracious reader who reads Jane Austen and C.S. Lewis and Robert Heinlein spells like I spit sometimes, I swear.
Oh my gosh.
Right, she's a bright kid, and so this year we started doing this. It's called Spelling Power, and it's not exactly a workbook setup, and it's for all ages. And basically what you do is you go through and give them a series of placement tests, and then you just do a little bit every day, and where you have these huge word flow lists. And I mean, when I say huge, I mean huge lists.
Wow.
Well, what you do, though, is you do sampling testing. You test them as they go in, and then you say, you know what, I'm going to give you 15 words today. If you can spell these words, we skip this section. And then once they get into the more definitive group stuff, they do a little bit of extra reminders. So you first make sure that the kid can pronounce the word to you, because if they're not pronouncing it right, they can't be spelling it right.
Right, right.
And I never remember having a teacher ever ask me to pronounce a word to them. So that was something I not really thought of.
You know what's so funny is I don't even know that the kids don't know how a word is pronounced until they'll use it in a sentence, and I'm like, oh, you read that somewhere, and you just kind of made your own pronunciation. And I'm like, oh, yeah, that's not how it's spelled, but good try.
Right, and that explained, because I had some of those spelling issues too of I read really well, but then later when I'm trying to recollect the word because I've never heard it, I don't think of it said right, so I don't spell it right. And so it goes
You know
through
what's so fun? Well,
Okay.
what's funny is when I first we were moving, back to LA. I was raised a little for a few years in Mexico, and my mom's from Southern California, and we came back. So we've been back and forth forever and ever. We were looking for an apartment, and I kept thinking, why don't any of these apartments have ice? And I finally asked my mom, like, why don't they have ice in the apartments? And she was like, what are you talking about? They don't have ice. We haven't even been into we haven't even looked at the apartments. We were just looking for rent signs. And I said, well, all of them say off ice. And she's like, that's office.
Nice. Nice. Yeah. It's one of those things that it can become really important. And that was one of the things they've got, this 10-step study sheet. After you test the kids and they get it wrong, you take those few words that they actually missed and you go through and you say it. Then you have them look at it and ask questions. Then they have to, like spell it and close their eyes and spell it again, and then you test them. And it's a great little program, but it's not a normal spelling program with workbooks and crosswords and all that fun stuff. But it's like 10 minutes a day, if that.
That's great. That's awesome.
So.
Well, Hannah, now, or I keep saying her name, let's just really say it out loud. There's a lot of people with her name. So she's in junior high, and so we're really more focusing on vocabulary when it comes to the spelling. So there's no actual spelling lesson going on. There's vocabulary, and what we're doing with the vocabulary, as you can see, it's like from classical roots, right? So we go over just different root words and where they come from, what the history is, where they're used and seen in different words in different ways, like exhilarate, exhilarated, exhilarating, exhilaration, all these different words, and like what the Latin root word was for, what it was. And basically this first lesson in this book was about ex, right? And so why it's using x and how it fits in that word, expound, exorbitant, so everything started with ex, but it was explaining what x means in a word and how it takes that root and turns that word into something else. So it's kind of interesting. So we're actually getting to the nitty-gritty of the word, and rather than just learning how to spell it. And I dig that.
I love that. That is when I went from a really cruddy speller to a much better speller of words I didn't know, is when we did like the Latin and Greek roots for like back when all that used to be in the SATs and we had to study that for the tests. Yeah. I love that. We've started doing more of that, and I really give the kids kudos too when they spell a word wrong in their writing, but they spelled it according to the rules. That they knew that was the root, and they tagged this on it and did a dorky English,
So frustrating.
Yeah, it's very much, you were on the right path with this, we're just weird, so let's just go with it.
Right.
The other thing we've done more as they've gotten older is I call them editless. And what we actually do is we take that first draft and we write the words in the margin. And then the kids have to go look them up, spell them correctly. But I was asking my daughter if she likes doing those. I was asking her last night. We had some time. I took her to go see Maleficent last night. And so we had some time before the movie started, and we were discussing it. She's like, there's nothing more frustrating than like writing and knowing the perfect word. She says, I can just write something down that sounds close to it, and I can look it up later. She says, versus trying to change the whole paragraph so it's only words I know how to spell. And I was like, wow. Well, that idea of knowing it's a rough draft. Knowing that it's a rough draft, she feels the freedom to spell it wrong but write the right word for what she really wants to express.
Oh, I see. Gotcha.
And so we've also done, and I don't know that if I mentioned it to you earlier, she was talking about something we've done before of common words. We've done word lists of synonyms. Mm-hmm. And then, like, we did a whole thing on the word good. and they gave me like 20 different versions of the word good and how they were different from the word good. So like beautiful is pretty, and things like that. And she views that as part of her spelling. And so she made her own list. She made her own and list. She wanted different ways. She realized she was using the word and too many times in a paragraph.
Oh, that's funny. Good for her. Yeah, that's one of the things actually that we do in this the fourth grade spelling book too. Is some of the lessons, like I said, some will be ing, some will be the suffixes, prefixes, or whatever. But sometimes it is that too. It's synonyms and antonyms. So it's starting to introduce concepts of grammar and using the word list, which is really kind of cool. So it just kind of helps when you go to that English, you go to that grammar lesson, to be able to explain that as well. So it all works together as opposed to this is spelling and this is grammar, So that's what I really like about different curriculums that are together.
That is the funny thing with homeschool kids. They look at things differently. My daughter was looking at my handwriting, and I write in a quasi form of cursive and printing because I'm that way.
That's how I do it.
Right. Your handwriting is so neat, and I'm like, you are so crazy, child. And we were talking about the fact that when I was in school, and I'm sure this was the case when you were in school, you had handwriting as a subject, then you had spelling as a subject, and you had writing or English as a subject, and she's like, how are those all different?
Right. Well, we actually, in our curriculum, we do have handwriting without tears, and it's basically not true. You still cry because you got to hold the pencil right, you got to do this, got to do that, got to make sure that, and there's like these little lessons like, oh, and now the bunny hops, and it's like like an H. You'll go down line, and then the bunny hops. And the bunny doesn't hop. The bunny just gets frustrated and goes past the line, and then mommy gets like, oh my God, you crossed the line. And there's always tears when it comes to writing. And, so I just started letting the kids learn keyboard because they're going to have to use keyboard, but I want to make sure that they also have really nice writing as well so they can, not have like chicken scratch. So, we're constantly kind of in flux with that. I've thrown out the handwriting workbooks. I'm just like, what? It's frustrating for all of us. I just want to cry. And my mom had like the old, 50s or 60s kind of cursive writing, and she's very particular about it. So particular about her writing. And she does not like my handwriting because it's kind of what you said. It's like in between printing and writing. But I actually love my writing. I'd love to see it as a font. And I've actually uploaded it as a font a couple of times, but they, we started going down that road. It was frustrating for them, and I just started thinking, why? We all end up using our own particular writing, and that's how the FBI catches you, right? So
exactly. That was actually my mom. Now, I had a nice steady C in handwriting all the way through elementary school. Let's just be honest. It was a nice steady C. It was readable, but not nice. And my mom's a criminologist, and she used to say the reason you need to have really good handwriting is to camouflage who you are a little bit.
Oh my gosh.
Because it's not just the FBI can find you. Your handwriting really says so much about your personality. And so growing up in that environment, that gave me a whole complex because then I took drafting. And so that pulled me back to the printing because my stepdad's a highway patrolman, and so he was pro printing all the way. But oh yeah, my little my chicken scratch. But
that's
my
so
husband's
funny.
the same way. He's like, teach them to type. You're spending all this time and effort frustrating them. And every so often when their handwriting is just more than I can read, we may have a little like a 10, 20-page refresher of some handwriting just because it's getting off track. But I found by like letting go, my 10-year-old's come to me and said, Mom, can I learn how to write cursive? Sure, I'll get you a book. And so that's something she's doing for fun.
Right.
She's also
just so you know, just the other thing too is like turning off the spell check. For anybody that says yes, go ahead and go and type it off. Turn off the spell check because you want to make sure that you know that the kid is spelling it correctly, and you can go back and and kind of outline. Go, oh, this this is the I before E thing. So watch it.
Oh, see, we have them do it in Notepad, so they get no help. There's no help in Notepad. But there are some fun things, I always like to call it learning with technology. I found some really great spelling apps. And we were talking about the fact earlier that neither one of us, I think, really do a whole lot of hand the kids a phone and an app for homework.
Yeah, no.
And I'm not a big fan of that, though I did find a really cool graphing calculator app. But that was for me, and that's a whole other subject. But I really started looking around at some of these spelling apps because even though I don't use them all the time, we do when we travel, and people are always asking me. And I found 3 that I really liked. One is called Spelling Bee, and literally Spelling Bee, and it is lists that you can do. I'm going to open it so we'll see how noisy it is. I can't remember. Okay, always. It actually is a randomized spelling bee that you can do different settings for your kid. Let's see, just total glare off that. And it uses the Google Voice. So it actually gives it to them audibly to help them type it in, because that was always the challenge in trying to study spelling on my own, is you have to have somebody read the words to you.
Right.
Then there's a spelling hero game where you're actually fighting the bad guy by spelling in the words. And it's kind of cool. It's fun. If you're going to be playing a video game anyways, nothing wrong with a little spelling in it. But I think my favorite is Spellword. And it is made so that you can build lists yourself. You can record it in your voice. So that's the voice they're already used to, or a normal human voice, as I like to refer to it. And you can make different lists, and they can actually type them in based off of what you're saying. So if you want to give them words that aren't even 100% English, you could do that too. You could use it for foreign language vocabulary, anything.
Very cool. So the reason that I, don't do the apps is because, we work with K-12, and K-12 is, online and offline. And so their lessons, when they're online, they do games like that. They integrate a lot of little fun games where they're like, pow, 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 doing kind of like, shoot this letter, it's the next letter in the word, and, and then you get points for getting the word right, but you have to like hop on the right, like a frog might have to hop on the right lily pad that has the letter on it that spells the word correctly, and then they win the game, that kind of thing. So they play games when they're already in school, and they spend enough time on screens that I prefer to, kind of look around. We're living in, we have a house in Mexico, and so we're back and forth in Mexico and San Diego. And so we're kind of doing the root word in Latin and showing this word and that word and how it's pronounced and all that good stuff just on street signs. And, or when we're watching Netflix and we have the subtitles, we're kind of like looking at the different words and everything like that, which is, kind of, it's like lending itself to language, which is really great. But that's my reason why I don't like apps. It's just we already spend enough time on the screens and playing the games. It's not that apps are bad. We already, we hit our quota every day on games, so we're good.
Well, see, yeah, you guys integrate that in, whereas we have a very small amount of school, and we do it all just about offline, and then all the rest of it for us is extra. So for us, it's not integrated in. And like I said, I'm not a big one for handing a kid a phone myself. So that's just my own little
Yeah, I love reiterating this because you and I come from, we both want to homeschool our kids, but we both have different ways of doing it, right? And so I just love that, every time we talk, there's like different ways that we're both doing it, but we're both getting the same thing done, essentially. And, our kids are doing it. They're actually spelling and writing and learning about Latin root words and Greek root words and all that good stuff, which is great. And so it just shows, again, that there are different methods for everything to go. It could be the natural flow. It could be workbooks. It could be living out in the world. There's just so many different ways for kids to learn. And you and I are like, two examples. I can only imagine the mosaic of, different ways that people are doing that.
I think that is it's once again with homeschooling, we've talked about it. I think we've said it in some way in every show that we've done of you have to find the method that works for you and your kids, because there are so many ways to get through this maze of life. The goal is to get to the end and be eating the cheese, not necessarily how you get there. So, why terrorize yourself with someone else's rules when you could enjoy it yourself? So.
I know, and we don't like, the whole real reason we're doing this is we don't really care for someone else's rules.
Well, we don't, but I can say for myself, I get asked at least once a week, what is the right way to do this? What is the best way to do that? And there is no best way, I think, is really the issue. I think people are still looking for a formula sometimes when they homeschool, and unfortunately, homeschooling won't provide you with one.
Yeah, you've got to know, and that's the thing about homeschooling too is, and everybody that's doing it, we all understand this, and everybody that's interested in doing this, you'll figure it out. you get to know your kid. You get to know your individual kid, their individual learning style. You know, when you go, sometimes, I mean, I don't talk about this at parties or anything like that, but there are different learning styles, and every to fit in the different boxes. Well, sometimes there's a blending of everything. You know, you've got like 4 different voices in your head, and one of them is driving, but there's a person next to the driver that's like the co-driver, and then there are people in the back seat that are like baka 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 baka. So we all have different ways of doing everything, and it's how we adjust, you know, the learning practices to each individual child. And because we're there, we get to do that. You have the time to do that. So that's the bonus, I think, for us and the kids. You know, the downside is we're always together forever and ever and ever. No, I'm just kidding. That's not the downside. It's actually nice.
No, it is,
but it is nice to have a break.
It is. It really is. I was in a conversation in another group, and it's in a dad and mom bloggers group, and somebody was saying, "Oh, I'm thinking about homeschooling," and I said, "Oh, I homeschool." She was looking for people, and somebody else says, "I admire that, but it just seems so hard." It's like the homeschooling isn't the hard part. The having them there all the time's the hard part.
Yeah, we find activities, and we find ways to, you know, and thankfully I have, you know, work every now and then that takes me away from them, and we get nice breaks from each other, which is great, you know, because we all get to miss each other a little bit. But you know what's really interesting though is when I'm gone and they're with their dad, they're mostly autonomous. They're mostly doing their work. I have to kind of stay on top of them a little bit, but they're already figuring out that, you know, there are consequences for not getting their work done, including spelling.
Yes, yes. And all I can say is for all you parents out there who allow your children to get on Facebook at some time in their life, even if it be at 18, a little bit of spelling and language teaching goes a long way on the Facebook statuses that I have to read. So, you know.
Yep, and those are from full-blown adults.
I know. That's the sad part. And I do. I have a lot of I have a fair amount of teenagers and college students on my Facebook feed right now, due to some different stuff I'm doing, and there's that moment of how much can I mom them? Can I tell them to delete that? Because if I was hiring them and I saw that, I'd worry.
Yeah. And so that's the practical application of it all, right? Is that, you know, whether we like it or not, we're always being judged by our actions, and we're always being judged by things like, you know, spelling and or how we behave, and, you know, and that sort of thing. And so, you know, it's okay to, you know, have people just kind of come and go based on your behavior, because I would rather have people that accept who I am personality-wise. But, you know, when you're looking for a job and you send in your resume, I actually used to do that. I was a recruiter, and I had to do interviews and set up the interviews, and I would look at resumes, and I would see, you know, so many misspellings, and I wouldn't even consider them, even if they had the right background, because I'm like, well, half your job is going to be having to communicate, you know, in written. So it's going to make us look bad if we hire you on and bring you in, and I don't have time to, you know, do what somebody didn't do for you in high school, unfortunately. So
I think that's the real takeaway from this, is spelling is taught to our children not just so they can be academically superior, but so they can live a real life and move out of our houses someday and afford things. Yes. So I think that's our final takeaway for the day, because we are over our 30 minutes. So I want to say, everyone, have a great week. If you have a subject you're struggling with, or just need some random ideas, or want to hear our input, let us know. Leave it on our Facebook page. Email us. Facebook us. You can find us both on Twitter. I'm at NerdMom.
And I am at Sugar Jones.
And you guys have a great week. We look forward to seeing you guys next week. Bye.
Bye.